Welcome to American Education FM, everybody. I'm Dr. Sean Brooks. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to start right here. I want to tell you a quick little story about what happened the other day regarding sitting down and trying to watch Occupied, the Stu Peters, Sean Hibbler documentary, again about Jewish influence in the United States and, of course, Adolf Hitler and real World War II history, so to speak. First of all, just before I read through this Substack, which is my latest Substack now, where I embed 2 documentaries, Occupied being one of them, but there's another one that came out right before Occupied did, and it's called the Bibi Files. First of all, I recommend that everybody who listens to the sound of my voice watch that documentary. You're welcome to watch Occupied as well. Again, if you've seen Europa: The Last Battle, Occupied isn't going to shock anybody. There's really nothing new that's in that. It's pretty straightforward. It's a little disorganized in my professional opinion, but it's for someone, which is the point. It's for somebody to watch and wake up to it and learn about it. But anyway, let me do this first. And again, I typically don't do this, but just for the sake of sort of brevity and organization, let me read the latest Substack to you because I kind of describe exactly what happened that particular evening when I sat down to watch Occupied. So here's what I said. First of all, the Substack is titled The Bibi Files and Occupied, 2 new documentaries for 2 different dimensions of awakening. I said the following here, quote, "On November 24th, I sat down to watch Occupied, which had been heavily promoted by Stu Peters since the summer of 2024. With that level of long-winded promotion, I knew the documentary would fall flat for those of us who have been awake on this issue for a very long time, certainly longer than Stu Peters and that of director and producer Sean Hibbler. After watching the first 15 minutes on Rumble on the Stu Peters Network channel, the video turned off, and you could only watch it after paying for it on Locals or through Stu Peters' website for $9. I immediately turned it off and refused to pay, as I knew it would be free on the internet shortly after. Stu Peters doesn't need the money, and paying for the truth isn't worth it in my humble opinion. In fact, I jumped into a Twitter space via Rumble and listened to a group of guys criticizing the documentary who are wide awake on the issue of Jewish supremacy and, of course, real World War II history, and criticizing Stu for not covering certain issues while being disorganized with others in the Occupied documentary. They were also upset that it was behind a paywall, and rightfully so. With that said, there will not be a documentary at this point that will have the breadth of the subject matter the same way that Europa: The Last Battle has. Too many people want to watch a current version of Europa: The Last Battle, but that will most likely never come. After all, why reinvent the wheel? However, I did know that a day or so before, a new documentary came out called The Bibi Files. I first ran across this on X and reposted it to my account to watch it later. That night, after turning off Occupied, I switched over to BitChute to watch The Bibi Files, and every channel that had uploaded it instantly had the video now blocked by BitChute for copyright infringement. You could not play it on any BitChute channel anywhere, and none of the videos played. The timing was highly suspicious. I then went over to Rumble and found the Bibi Files there and watched it. Plainly put, if you read my Substack, listen to my show, American Education FM, or watch my This Is War videos of the 2 documentaries, the Bibi Files is the one that everyone should watch. I would consider this to be mandatory viewing for every American. While Occupied might be for a younger, older, or less knowledgeable audience, the Bibi Files is deeper and more descriptive regarding current events that Occupied certainly fails to cover, in particular from the Middle Eastern perspective. In the Bibi Files, you learn, hear, and watch the investigation into Benjamin Netanyahu by the Israeli government that has been going on now for years. Benjamin Netanyahu has been on trial under criminal investigation for years now, and he clearly started the October 7th, 2023 events in order to delay his prosecution for bribery, war crimes, accepting undisclosed gifts, and much more, all of which are illegal under Israeli law. What you will see in the documentary are the very investigators and media individuals who have been going after Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife Sarah for a long time now. Benjamin Netanyahu was illegally elected. He manipulates the public into believing that they need him for defense purposes. And they also highlight how Benjamin Netanyahu starts wars and has been funding Hamas from the start to continue his never-ending wars and deny a two-state solution, which would end war in that region. You also get a true sense of the Netanyahu's tyrannical personalities and how no one over there likes them. In fact, the citizens fear the Netanyahus greatly. Without giving any more away, you will see the interrogation footage of endless people of whom have associated with Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife Sarah over the years. One of these people include a major Hollywood executive, along with Miriam Adelson and Sheldon Adelson. In fact, the Adelsons look like deer in headlights and completely panicked. Frankly put, the Jews in Israel are turning on each other. So when someone screams that the Adelsons in Israel control Donald Trump, perhaps you should consider this angle. Maybe Trump owns Miriam Adelson and holds the keys to bring down Israel and their corrupt government. After all, if political blackmail is the key to who runs the political mafia, and you save or spare the blackmailed, doesn't that make the savior the person who is really in charge? Do you think that Miriam Adelson wants to go to jail for the rest of her short life in Israel for gifting the Netanyahus material wealth along with receiving gifts from the Netanyahus for more influence? What if those paths of influence and blackmail have been cut off? Rather interesting that Donald Trump has been quiet on the issue of Benjamin Netanyahu's trial and criminal investigation by the ICC for international war crimes, along with Israeli war crimes in his own country, while other blackmailed American politicians can't seem to keep their mouths shut. I guarantee you will pick up on this within the first 50 minutes of the Bibi Files documentary, and how this Jewish supremacy quote-unquote house of cards is ready to fall. The Jews that you will see in this documentary that are being accused of illegality and interrogated are weak and scared. If this is our enemy, then they can be beaten. Again, feel free and watch both of these documentaries, but definitely watch the Bibi Files. This will prove that those here in America, certainly those in the so-called truth-telling alternative media, don't have all of these possible angles all figured out. Not to mention, after watching this, pay attention to every American citizen and politician who defends the Netanyahus, the IDF, and Mossad. It's safe to say they too are the enemy of the people. However, just because you see a picture of Donald Trump with Miriam Adelson or Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife Sarah, don't think for a minute that Trump and the military don't know what's really going on. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer, unquote. And then again, what I do is I link both of those so that you can, of course, watch them on Rumble if you're interested, because both documentaries do exist on Rumble, but then I embed them in the actual Substack article itself. Again, that's my general take of these two documentaries. Again, Occupied is for somebody. Maybe it's for college kids who don't know anything about this yet. Maybe they've never even heard of Europa the Last Battle. They've never thought about picking up Mein Kampf and reading it and comparing it to what's going on in the real world. And they want to watch a 2-hour documentary about what's really going on over in the Middle East and how those individuals are controlling politicians over here in America, etc., etc. Again, it could be a jumping off start for people, and I'm not going to criticize too much anybody who creates anything like that, interested, of course, in telling the truth and waking people up. That's a very good thing. However, the Bibi Files, for us, really dives into who these people are. And if you want to see Netanyahu and his wife Sarah screaming at the top of their lungs while they're being interrogated, because they look panicked, completely panicked. They're pathological liars. We know that they're murderers. We know that they've had people killed. I mean, they're the worst of the worst, but they're panicked because they have endless walls around them closing in on them, and they know this. What, of course, makes our government disgusting and the politicians in our government disgusting is they're clearly blackmailed because that's the only reason they would be defending the Netanyahus. It's the only reason that they would be attempting to sanction the ICC for what Netanyahu has clearly done. And it's the only reason that they are defending Israel in any way whatsoever is because, again, they're blackmailed. They have these politicians on tape having sex with kids, or taking money, or taking bribes, or, again, killing somebody or doing something else that's just absolutely horrible. Again, it could be drug use, it could be 1,000 other things. Who's to say? But, again, of the 2 documentaries, you can certainly watch both. I'm not going to tell you not to. You can do whatever you'd like. It's a free country. But definitely watch the Bibi Files. I'm telling you, it's an eye-opener. It's an absolute eye-opener. And again, you see how weak these people are. These are not holier-than-thou individuals. Again, the criminals overseas and the criminals in Israel, and of course all of the people running numerous operations over there, they're remarkably weak. They're incredibly scared. And they're, again, doing whatever they have to do to try to manipulate the masses, including, of course, starting wars. Because, let's face it, that's what Netanyahu, that's what Mossad and the IDF do. They'll kill their own people, they'll blame anybody else for it, and then they'll, again, tell everybody that they are the saviors and that they are protecting their own citizens, when in fact that's not what they're doing. They're manipulating endless people who actually still believe the Netanyahus and of course Mossad and the IDF. But for those of us who can see through it, they're not fooling us. So again, during Thanksgiving here, and if you've got some time, sit down, curl up one evening, and watch the Bibi Files. I'm telling you, it's a game changer. It truly is. It is like Europa: The Last Battle, in that you're seeing it from their angle. You're seeing it from a completely different side of things. So, again, I could keep talking about it, and I certainly might in the future, but I'm almost inclined to go back and watch it again, because it was that good, and it's that intense. But again, it also highlights how weak these people are. I mean, all this Jewish supremacy talk that's existed for a very long time. Yes, I understand that, they own the banks and they run the banks and BlackRock and Vanguard and all of that. And I mean, I get it. I fully get it. And it's terrible. But once you start pulling these threads and you get these people in an interrogation room and you start interrogating them, I'm telling you, they look like children who stole the last piece of candy and they got caught. They instantly start crying, screaming, banging their hands on tables. They look terrified. So just from a satisfaction standpoint, if you want to see your enemy look terrified, watch the Bibi Files. You're going to see it. And their behavior is completely irrational and totally in line with the way that a criminal would behave. They get very specific. Apparently, Sarah Netanyahu has a serious drinking problem. You're talking about thousands and thousands of bottles of champagne that have been gifted to her and given to her for political favors. This is completely against the law over there, as you would think it would be against the law over here as well. And it certainly is in certain angles, I think. But again, you start pulling these threads of this corruption and knocking over these dominoes, I'm telling you, the rest will fall over too. So I'm optimistic as to what's coming down the line here, because as we know, they are the enemy and they have to go away. And this influence and this control over these organizations has to go away. Again, I will link that in the description below and you can check that out. But I'm telling you, the Bibi Files is mandatory watching. No doubt about it. Okay, education stuff. Here we go. This might be a shorter episode. My apologies on that. But first of all, again, I want to thank Jesse James and Outcast for having me on their show on Monday night. A lot of fun. Again, we talked about a lot of things, again, that we bring up here on the show. We brought up all the Danielle Mann videos and that kind of behavior. And then, I ran through the entire school system apparatus and how demoralization is, again, a part of the game here. It's the way that human resource departments are run. That by letting someone, a horrible teacher like Danielle Mann, who's completely brainwashed and believes endless lies, and of course is the latest NPC who falls for anything, that letting one of these individuals back into a school environment demoralizes the entire school environment. It truly does. I mean, it demoralizes the other teachers who are morally sound, who are not reckless on the internet and would never even think about doing or saying such a thing. And it also demoralizes all of the excellent students that actually exist, who, again, try to learn the truth and critically think about what world they live in and what's really going on, and how they are unfortunately still being targeted by such an individual, simply, again, by letting such an individual actually return to the very school environment. So demoralization, unfortunately, is the name of the game, which is remarkably unfortunate. Now, speaking of demoralization, this happened just the other day locally as well, and I wanted to bring this to people's attention. I brought up previously how there was a school teacher at the middle school who was placed on paid administrative leave after a resource officer confiscated a fanny pack that had 1/4 of an ounce of marijuana in it from a black student. And that this middle school teacher, this young female middle school teacher, allegedly also was giving out her personal phone number to numerous students, and had been doing so for at least a year's time, and that students did in fact have her personal phone number on their phones. And then it was suspected, of course, that the fanny pack was given to the student who had the dope by the school teacher themselves, and then it was rumored that the actual school teacher herself was a part of some drug-running operation that was taking place. She was getting drugs from someone outside of the school and then bringing them into the school and then giving it to students, or selling it to students, something along those lines. According to the school district now, this school teacher has been reinstated, and the so-called rumors swirling about this particular teacher are all false, according to, again, the school district. If they can be believed, which, let's face it, they're pathological liars, so why would they tell the truth about anything? This statement went out yesterday, and it said the following. News release, November 25th, 2024, Talawanda School District Communications Office. Her name is Holly Hansel. She's a complete fool. Talawanda Middle School investigation closed, it says. All TMS students are safe! ! Talawanda School District has completed its investigation regarding TMS teacher placed on administrative leave on November 18, 2024. While discipline has been issued, the information reported on social media is not accurate. Talawanda School District takes all complaints and concerns seriously and follows TSD policies and procedures. Well, that's a lie, and I can prove it. It says the district will not expound on this investigation further as this is a personnel matter. Unquote. And that's it. Just like that. All these rumors about this particular teacher, all of this stuff taking place, and then they sweep it under the rug. No problem here, nothing to see here. Don't ask any more questions. We were right, you're wrong. And that's the way that it is. So if Talawanda School District takes all complaints and concerns seriously and follows Talawanda School District policies and procedures, why was the adopted black son of a former school board member allowed to physically assault and threaten to kill numerous female students? Why was that individual not expelled? Why was it not suggested to the board member at the time, a David Bothist, that he remove his son from the school building because it looked like nepotism? And this would look like nepotism. So when Talawanda or any school district in America says that they take all complaints, all is a big word, all complaints and concerns seriously, and follow district policies and procedures, ladies and gentlemen, they're lying right to your face. But make no mistake, endless parents will still send their children right back into these environments. As I've said a million times before, if it was a babysitter doing this and behaving this way, you wouldn't need proof that the babysitter was behaving that way regarding your children or other children. All you would need is someone to tell you that. They would say, hey, have you ever had so-and-so babysit your kids? And you'd say, well, yeah. And they'd say, well, I heard that all these other kids that are being babysat by this person are in fact being abused, that they're being lied to, that their parents are being lied to, and that bad things are happening. That parent with that kid, or a kid, who's being babysat by that babysitter wouldn't need stone cold proof. They wouldn't need to interrogate the babysitter, ask the babysitter questions, reach out to him and talk to him to see if it's true or not. They would simply say, well, I'm never going to send my kid to that babysitter again. Not so with the American K-12 school system. which is why I always say, and you've heard me say it 1,000 times, don't say brainwashing isn't real. It's very real. Now, I want to read you something here, which I think is an interesting exchange, and it proves my point. It proves that brainwashing is very real. As I've said before, and I said it on Jesse James's show, I recently joined within the last few weeks a local Facebook group here, filled with parents, again, by and large, many of which send their children to the Talawanda School District, the local school district in the town where I live. And this is where, again, a lot of information gets shared from parents and, these kinds of news reports and other rumors and gossip regarding what's going on in the school district that the school district is working very hard to keep under wraps and not tell anybody. Again, this is their mode of operation. This is exactly what they do all of the time nationwide. So I decided to make a second post here, and I was specifically referencing, again, home learning programs, specifically Abeka.com, as one example and one alternative. Again, this is something that endless people are not even considering, even when their children are literate and they can read and write and comprehend. Maybe they even have straight A's in the American K-12 public school system. But what makes them think that a program that is a Christian private school academy program like Abeka, with all those names, again, private Christian academy, those particular words are used when it comes to Abeka and referencing Abeka within Abeka's own vernacular. That sounds a whole lot better on any kind of a resume than Talawanda Public School. But getting parents to understand this is a very difficult thing. So, again, don't say brainwashing isn't real. I'm going to read you my post that I sent out to this group, which again has approximately 1,800 members in this group, give or take. And then I'm going to read some of the responses to my particular post. In fact, the vast majority of the responses came from one individual, and you'll hear again the excuses that they make also, albeit brief, but they make excuses. So here's what I said. I said, quote, I would invite individuals to consider the following given the actions of the school teachers, the union, and the administration in Talawanda School District in the last board meeting. Has anyone considered that the continued actions of Talawanda School District make the possession of a Talawanda School District high school diploma next to worthless in the eyes of outsiders, online universities, and future employers? Anytime an employer, school, or resume reviewer looks at Talawanda School District as being the place where one graduated, the next place they go is the internet to view more information about TSD. What do you think that person or group is going to find on the internet about TSD? I can assure you it isn't anything good. One story after another of corruption, illegal and unethical behavior, etc. The internet never forgets. A wise man once said, if a child can read and write, they can teach themselves. Perhaps it's time that children who can read and write leave TSD forever and teach themselves using an online learning academy like Abeka.com. And then I link the website, which includes the keywords in it again, Christian school. You would think this would matter to people. I digress. I went on and I said, quote, a K-12 diploma from Abeka carries with it the gravitas of a private Christian school because it is one. Elementary school-aged children use this as even both of their parents work and are gone all day long. Once the parents return home from work, the children are asked to show their parents what they learned that day, thereby reinforcing their understanding of the content. The best part is, learning at Abeka from home doesn't take all day. This frees the mind of the distractions that exist in brick-and-mortar schools, including the satanic agenda that is pervasive throughout, and the ever-changing unnecessary requirements and ridiculous activities. Give Abeka a call, and watch how understanding and accommodating they are. Perhaps the time has come for families to stop rearranging furniture on the Titanic with the sending of your child to TSD and control something that you can control. What you can control is the health of your child in a healthy learning environment, where they have the freedom to explore the truth about the world we live in, with a rigor that is absent at TSD and always has been. The Great Awakening is here, and it isn't going away. Endless families have left the public, private, and charter school systems, certainly in the last 4 years, to never return, and they have zero regrets. That number is growing by the day. The parents are happier, their children are happier, and everyone within their families are healthier minded as a result. Endless parents make excuses for not making this move in the lives of their own children, yet it's a lack of faith that keeps one from taking the first step. I have met endless parents and children who use this system, and they all say the same positive things. Quote, "I wish I had left the public school system sooner and used this system instead. I've seen an instant change in my child's mind, attitude, and they love learning. They never read books and hated reading. Now I can't keep a nonfiction book out of their hands." The reality is that the public, private, and charter school system is designed by government to make your children slaves and detest learning, to only find out later in life, if they're lucky, that what they were taught in school were misguided lies by misguided people. Then, they have to unlearn everything that they were taught from age 5 through 17 and older. The choice is yours, but if you expect anything to change at TSD, you are sorely mistaken. Once the Federal Department of Education is eliminated, and it will and should be, the irrational people at the local level will defend public school, and those who work within will only double down on their irrational behavior. If you thought the controlling, unprofessional, and satanic behavior is bad, it will get worse at TSD and all public schools in the next few years. Abeka also has a YouTube channel, and you should watch those videos there. If these families can do it, given their varying circumstances, that are probably far more complicated than yours, then why can't you do it? And then I link the two YouTube channels that have to do with everything related to Abeka. The first one is what you end up finding when you type in Abeka into the search engine of YouTube and you just hit return on your keyboard. It's endless people talking about how they use the Abeka system and how much they love it. And then, of course, the very YouTube channel itself of Abeka. I went on here and concluded, I said, remember, learning is not homeschooling. As a parent, you are always the best teacher in your child's life. Abeka does not require you to be there to hover over your child's shoulder for 8 hours a day. Your child has the freedom to take days off, take breaks, and relearn healthy time management habits that are absent in government schooling systems. One final note. Talawanda School District and all public schools don't want you to know what was just explained here. Let that sink in as to why. My suggestion is that you get out of TSD now and take back control of the one thing you have always had control of, your child's learning and health. After all, your child is the most valuable thing on earth. Good day." Unquote. So here was a response I received. This was from a Jared Victor Vreeland. They said the following, quote, "Agree with homeschooling," and by the way, before I read this, remember the part in my message where I said people will end up with endless excuses as to why they don't do this. So here we go, case in point. Jared Victor Freeland said, "Agree with homeschooling as a valid option, although my kids are not homeschooling." And then they went on and said, "It's a ridiculous take that these controversies are going to affect our students' university or employment options. They won't. If a high schooler has solid extracurriculars and is actually making an effort to learn and retain the info they are being taught, the world is still their oyster. One thing to note, though, advertising specific things while pushing a narrative is a great way to give up your credibility." Unquote. No, the exact opposite of everything that they said is in fact true. This again, ladies and gentlemen, is my point. This is how deep the brainwashing goes. This individual has at least 2 children, so they say. They instantly foreclose that they're not going to be homeschooling their children. They do not believe for a minute that where a child goes to school and what is going on in that school has any bearing or weight against said individual, because that's where they end up graduating from. If a person believes that, you've lost your mind. Take Penn State University, for example. I know I'm talking about universities right now just for the sake of argument, but the same thing happens at the K-12 level. If if illegality and criminality occur anywhere and you're associated with it, guilt by association is a real thing. Any employer is going to ask you about this if they're interested in finding out what your take was and where you stood on the illegality and unprofessional behavior taking place within said environment. Anybody who does their due diligence is going to care about that. Take Penn State University from back in the day when Jerry Sandusky was touching kids and Joe Paterno was running for cover. There were people who stayed there and got a Penn State degree and stood up and defended Joe Paterno when Joe Paterno knew what was going on. They left with a Penn State degree, and then at the time, certainly around that moment in time, people looked at those individuals and were like, you came from Penn State, so you're in here for an interview, let's talk about Penn State. What do you think went on there? What's going on, and what role did you have to play? Were you one of the people supporting Joe Paterno in his front lawn of his house when people were calling for his resignation? Were you, a pedophile apologist with the rest of the pedophile apologists? These are questions that people, again, who are doing their due diligence will ask someone. Now, yes, some people won't care because, unfortunately, that's the spectrum in the world we live in. That spectrum does exist. People will simply say, high school diploma, fine, you're hired. Other people will ask questions, and those questions will be probing questions because they will want time to sift through what what this potential employee or employee candidate has actually been participating in. Or even worse, what they think about particular issues, like I said, that went on within that environment. So to say such a thing, that it doesn't matter, or that that no one will care, is ridiculous. That's beyond ridiculous. And no, the next sentence that they said, if a high schooler has solid extracurriculars and is actually making an effort to learn and retain the info that they're being taught, the world is their oyster, what world do you live in? It doesn't work that way. That's not the real world. That's delusional. The world is not their oyster if they memorize lies. It just means they're going to be taken advantage of and not even know it, and not know why they're being taken advantage of. And then, of course, they said advertising specific things while pushing a narrative is a great way for you to give up your credibility. What does that even mean? I'm advocating for homeschooling, and then I provide you a homeschooling outlet that most people don't even know about, let alone bother to look up. I gave you quite literally the answer on a silver platter, and then it was just tipped over. The next person responded and says, I suspect John Adams is an alias because that's my name in this group. Because again, initially I wanted to create an anonymous account because I didn't want people to know who I was, but now I don't care. So here's what they ended up saying. Again, the same person replied back, the first commenter, and they said, this is my response back to them. I said, excuses, period. Just like I said, period. Extracurriculars are irrelevant. No one gets accepted someplace because they are in math club. What I've done here is give people an option. There are endless online accredited home learning options that are available. If you want to be shackled to the matrix, that's your choice. They, of course, responded. They said, first of all, I did not make a single excuse in my post. Well, of course you did. Your whole post was nothing but excuses. They went on and said, secondly, we live in a world of inflated GPAs and non-mandatory test scores, and you really believe that extracurriculars aren't important in getting into top schools? ? They said, I hope you aren't mentoring kids through these programs because you're clearly misguided. Finally, don't suggest I'm stuck in the matrix when it's you wearing the mask, unquote. I, of course, responded. I said, my name is Dr. Sean Brooks. Use a search engine. You'll get all you can handle. Universities are bleeding enrollment and even folding. If higher education, quote unquote, is a goal, it's not hard to be accepted practically anywhere, in particular online, like Purdue or Northwestern University, for example. I said, so no, extracurriculars, quote unquote, don't matter. It's a lie that is thrust down parents' throats to force their kids into activities they don't really need. If you want that for your children, then that's your prerogative. Just understand that when they go to college, they'll be sitting next to someone in class who didn't do any of that, unquote. Guess what response I received back? None. Didn't get a response back. Of course not. Of course I wouldn't. Why would I get a response back? I know more about the subject than they do. They fell for it. They fell right into my trap. They proved my point. A person's ability to think only goes so far as their mind allows them to think about something. And it only goes so far as their, of course, knowledge on said subject. These people, again, bless their hearts, and I mean that, bless all of them. But they actually believe that they can change the American school system to cater toward what they want, just like, of course, the left thinks that they can. Unfortunately, what people don't understand is that the left has been doing this for a very long time, and they actually got their way. What everybody doesn't get, though, is that both sides of the proverbial political aisle aren't getting their way. Because everybody's being lied to. You can't change the curriculum. Do you think that the film Occupied is going to be shown in an American high school? How about the Bibi Files? How about Europa: The Last Battle? Of course not. It'll never be mentioned. No one will ever even utter it, and if a school teacher does, they'll lose their job. That should tell you who the enemy is. They aren't interested in telling the truth. They're not even interested in learning it, let alone encouraging teachers to learn. This is why they have all of the quote-unquote professional development, so to speak. It's the machine controlling what the teacher is doing all of the time and trying to get them to understand that they are the harbingers of knowledge as a school district, and they want people to actually believe that. It's one of the reasons why when I taught school, they hated the fact that I would go to conferences, national and state level conferences, which were usually the middle school association conferences by and large. And sometimes I would go to technology conferences also. And I use these conferences, as even my dad suggested. He said, you use these conferences as a way to gauge what you're doing in the classroom. And whether or not what you're doing in the classroom is the thing that you should really be doing, or is it not the thing that you should be doing. But he openly said, and he was right, it's not because things that are being discussed in those education conferences at the state or national levels, or even international levels, it's not that they're doing everything that's right. They're typically not. It's to basically see how crazy is the business becoming. And then you need to dial it back in your classroom and not be that way. And I always knew that innately anyway. That when you had all these massive corporations selling all their products and wares and the exhibit halls and all this other stuff, it was always just one toy after another, one publication after another, one gimmick after another. Rather than just being an effective educator, knowing your subject matter, teaching the truth, exposing your students to lots of different ways of learning and attaining information and acquiring information and then sending them on their way. That's all a school teacher really has to do. But the business doesn't allow for that. It seeks to control every aspect of a so-called educator, right down to flat out lying to their face and telling them that everything is fine when it isn't. So again, I pray for that individual, I truly do, and I pray for their kids, because he's in the matrix, his children are in the matrix, and there's no getting out of it. Not unless they walk away from this system. As you've heard me say a million times, a valedictorian for a high school is only the person who memorizes the most lies. That's it. Congratulations, you get an extra medal around your neck that everybody gets to see you wear for about an hour or two, and then you take it off and you never put it on again. Why? Because you have a 5.8 GPA, and you've taken all these extracurricular classes, and you've been in every single club, imaginable, and you're in every single picture in the yearbook, and now you're going off to college. Like that person is somehow going to be more successful, or the world is going to be their oyster. If that train of thought were true, then every valedictorian would hold the highest positions in every company, business, property, political position of influence, however you want to put it. They would all be valedictorians. But that's not true. Again, the whole business of the extracurricular activities is absurd. The one thing that schools, in particular K-12 schools and universities, never can evaluate for is human will and determination and God-given innate ability and God-given driven purpose. They can never evaluate this. They can never test it. They can never give you an essay to describe it. There can never be a human being who reads that or evaluates such a ridiculous evaluation because they don't exist. I graduated from high school with a 3.0 GPA. I was a B student. I was a B, C student, occasionally got an A, but that was about it. I never got A's in high school in an academic course. I'd get an A in gym or an A in something else, but I would never get, I just never did. And the reason was very simple. I didn't apply myself because I didn't care. I'm not saying this to sound lazy. I mean, I'm not trying to make myself sound stupid. I'm just openly telling people that I was not a person who enjoyed the school environment at all. It was remarkably unnatural to me. I've described that numerous times on the show, and it's 100% true and will remain so. But I also knew that while I was going through the school system, that I was a product of a long line of educators, and very good ones, who were both formal and informal teachers. And I knew that I could do this job as an educator better than the people who were actually teaching me in these brick and mortar environments. So very early on, certainly I would say halfway through high school, I said, I'm going to be a school teacher because if these idiots at the front of the room can do this, and they're not doing a very good job and they're making a living, why can't I do it better than they do it and make a living? And so that's what I did. So again, I did enough to get by. I showed up all of the time. I never skipped class. I never, I never ditched or anything when I was a high school student. But again, by the time I got into college, I just kind of went along with the program. I didn't try too hard. I did most of the learning on my own in my own free time and in my own spare time. Certainly the books they had us reading in college were by and large garbage. So I would always go to a library or a bookstore and buy my own. And as it turned out, the vast majority of the books that I was reading on my own were about psychology, sociology, and political science. That's what I was reading recreationally in my spare time. But again, there was no determination test that I had to take, so to speak, in order to figure out if I was going to be a good educator. I just knew I was going to be one. Because if you tell the truth and you care and you put in the work to learn, and then you bring that information to your students, how bad can you possibly be? And the other thing, too, that I never did when I was a school teacher is I never made fun of students who wanted to homeschool and students who did homeschool and parents who had their children home learning all of the time. I would have students come and go. I had students again show up to me who were home learning and had home learned all through elementary school, and then they showed up in middle school. And then a lot of times, again, they would stick around for a short amount of time and they'd say, I don't like it here. And I'd say, I know, it sucks, doesn't it? And they'd go, yeah, it does. But you're a public school teacher. Why are you saying that? And I'm like, well, because I know that home learning is the safest and most objective way to learn. Certainly learn the truth about the real world we live in. Not in this prison mental institution. And they would look at me with big eyes like, wow, I can't believe he's actually saying that. Yeah, I was a home learning advocate as a public school teacher, 100%. Anybody who's objective would be, because that's the best place to learn, by and large. Unless, of course, your parents are drug addicts and abusive, in which case that's probably not the best learning environment at home. But either way, yeah, it was always the case. And I had a student once again show up, and they were female student, remarkably bright, incredibly polite, and far more civilized than most other individuals. And again, they showed up for a couple of years, and then they entered the high school environment as a ninth grader. And I remember before they left the middle school, they told me, they said they were going to give ninth grade a try at the high school. And I looked at them and I said, good luck. I said, but if your parents have given you the choice as to whether or not to home learn and teach yourself at home, or attend a public high school here, my recommendation would be that you home learn. And she nodded her head and she said, I know. She said, my parents have given me the choice and I can unenroll myself anytime I want. And I said, perfect. That's awesome. See, that right there is freedom. That's the definition of freedom. When parents give their children that level of freedom to choose where they really want to go to school, but also exposing them to all different angles of how to learn, where to learn, when to learn, how long that learning can take, and a number of other things. It's fantastic. As it turned out, she ended up leaving the high school about 1 month into the school year, I believe, maybe not even that long, into her ninth grade school year, and she ended up enrolling in a nearby private academy, which was far more rigorous, small classes, very few teachers, and was considered one of the more premier ways to learn at the time, certainly in the town where I lived, which, oddly enough, it was also attached to the local community college as well. But again, that's where a lot of the high school students ended up going if they didn't home learn. They just ended up going to this very small private academy. And they ended up, again, excelling and doing very well. So, yeah, there's too many options today is my overall point. The options are endless, and they're all over the place. So no, you don't have an excuse. No one has an excuse anymore. In fact, I'll tell you this. After I was on Jesse James's and Outcast's show on Monday evening, a listener of the show and a pal of mine sent me earlier in the day an X Space that was going to be taking place at 9 o'clock that night about, again, quote-unquote, homeschooling. And the discussion was brief. Again, it lasted maybe an hour or so. And I jumped in essentially on the last 30 minutes of it, roughly. But it was well done. There was an individual from the Homeschool Defense League, I believe, or one of those organizations that, again, advocates for home learning. And there was another individual who was speaking, who was talking about how they had homeschooled their children and home taught their children, apparently over the course of traveling to 4 continents and either living on 4 different continents or just traveling and using homeschooling curriculum with their children. And one of the suggestions that she actually had, which was my takeaway from the talk, which is a very good tip, and it certainly should tell people about the nefarious nature of the public school system and government in general, is she ended up saying that when you unenroll your children from a public school, do not tell the public school that you are going to be homeschooling your children or home teaching them. You simply unenroll your children, and when they ask why, you say you're moving. And that's it. Even if you're not moving, you can lie to a public school and tell them why you're leaving and then make up the reason as to why. But what you don't want to do is tell them that you're leaving the school system because of XYZ and you're all assholes and you're all corrupt and you're all this and you're all that. As easy and as fun as that would be to let them all have it on your way out the door, she recommended that you not do that. And the other speaker, again, who was the advocate for the Defense League of homeschooling, is that they agreed with them, basically. And they said that is a good tactic to use. That even if you aren't moving, you just tell them you're moving, and that you, of course, need written copies and emailed copies of your children's or child's transcripts from that school district that they've been attending so that you can use them in the future if you choose to, and then you just take your kids out and you leave. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to burn bridges, and they're not even bridges. You just don't want to start fires, basically, on your way out the door, because then you can give the school district a little bit of ammo. Certainly it depends on the state in which you're living, but you can give them ammo to basically report the parents or the children to either government, CPS, and other organizations, again, that might want to have oversight over these particular children and, of course, your family. So you want to leave the public school system quietly. You just want to say, we're moving and I need their transcripts because we're unenrolling. And that's all the school, your local public school has to know. They don't have to know anything else. And yes, you can lie to them. You can lie to their face. You can even email it to them. And you can say, we're unenrolling our children because we're moving. Blah, 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 blah. And I need, their transcripts, and then have a great day. And then that's it. And they have to oblige. I mean, they have to send that information to you. So that was their tip. They also said this, which was fantastic. They said when they did that with their own children in California, they ended up not moving, of course. The whole we're moving away thing was a lie. But at least that was my recollection of her story. But she did say this. She said that she ended up communicating with a number of parents who were curious about how she left the school system and how she unenrolled her children and what was the process in which she went about to get that done. She explained it to them, and she said shortly thereafter, because the school district was so bad, and of course they were engaging in endless unprofessional activities, she said that approximately 60% of all of the students and the families who had students in that school district ended up unenrolling their children. 60%. She said the school district practically fell to the ground. They were in financial dire straits. They couldn't get levies passed because no one was attending the school district anymore. By and large, they didn't have the votes for such a levy. And she said, and that's where I left it. Now, given the fact, of course, that it's today's day and age, and it's California, the school is probably filled with illegal aliens. So I'm sure their enrollment numbers have dramatically increased. However, that right there is exactly how you do it. Not to mention, that's how you get, as I've said in past episodes, that's how you get state attention on the individuals who are locally running a school district. And it's not good attention. And it's attention that the local school district never wants, which means that's the thing that you can and should do. So if you're a homeschooling, home learning, home teaching family, who and wherever you're communicating with other people, if you are communicating with other people, I would recommend that you move that information onto them. You tell them to unenroll their children quietly. Here's a particular program you can use that your children can jump right into if they want. But the other thing that was discussed, which is very important in that X space, was what they referred to as the unschooling of children, and how you have to deprogram your children from the public school system the way that it's designed, to get them to understand that that's not the way that it works inside of a home environment. And so, again, that was an interesting discussion as well, and it was an excellent point. I mean, children should learn time management, yes, but they should also learn when they do their best learning and when and where they do it. I'll give you an example. Me personally, I do my best learning and my best reading and my best thinking in the early morning hours. That's when I usually record this show. That's when I do all of my best stuff by and large. The later the evening goes on, the worse I get. The more my brain starts to slow down and I start to get tired, and that's not unusual among human beings. But at the exact same time, that's why I design the show the way that I design it. When I was in graduate school, I did the exact same thing. I would do all my reading, all my researching, and all of my learning in the early morning hours. Anywhere from 6 in the morning all the way through, say, like noon or 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and then I would turn it off. Same thing with the books I wrote. I would do all of the writing anywhere from 6 in the morning all the way until about 2 in the afternoon, and then I would stop. Because after that, you're just running on fumes. But again, the school system is designed to get people to just all think the same way, behave the same way, do the same thing at the exact same time all the time. That's not the way that we work. We're all different in lots of different ways. Yes, we're similar in many, but you get what I'm saying. Anyway, it was an interesting X space. Some of those X spaces are really cool for stuff like that. And again, you learn a great deal. And you get to listen and even converse with certain individuals. Again, if you have a question or you want to make a couple of comments or whatever, I didn't say anything, but I was just, I just tuned in and listened for a while. And yeah, you walk away with a few takeaways, which is good stuff. So there you go. Just a suggestion. But again, if you're interested in getting on X and getting an account, you can pop into some of those X spaces and learn a great deal. Okay. A couple other education stories here moving on. There was this, again, back to the old Jewish supremacy thing, and why on earth are they all panicking? This was from the Jerusalem Post, of all places, just the other day, and it was titled, "Texas Jews are deeply concerned, quote unquote, about Christian material in proposed public school curriculum." Why so concerned? What's it your business? Why do you care all of a sudden what gets taught? Afraid that, all the binoculars are going to turn in your direction and people are going to start to see what you've been doing this whole time? It says Texas is poised to adopt a public school curriculum that refers to Jesus as the Messiah, asks kindergartners to study the Sermon on the Mount, and presents the Crusades in a positive light. This, of course, drives the Jerusalem Post crazy, as you would think that it would. So there was that. Again, not going to dive too deep into that, but you get the general picture from the headline there. More good news, there was this out of Georgia, University System of Georgia to ban diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then it says commit to neutrality and teach Constitution. Well, isn't that good? It says the University System of Georgia's Board of Regents has recommended a number of new and revised policies for its institutions, such as a commitment to institutional neutrality, the prohibiting of DEI tactics, and a mandatory education in America's founding documents. You see what's happening here? There is a shift that is taking place. But keep in mind, there is a separate dimension of thought on this which I want to mention. This is a bit of a Jewish Masonic trick to some extent. Because much like any good business, businesses can sniff out what's good for business based on who's in so-called power and what is not good for business. So now that Donald Trump is coming back formally in the eyes of endless Americans, these colleges and universities know that having these kinds of DEI Marxist Jewish programs are not good for business. Now, they haven't been good for business for a very long time, but they of course have learned the hard way. Low enrollment, which of course forced them to raise tuition costs among all students, whether it be incoming students or the ones that are already there. And then, of course, what does that do? Raising tuition costs. Well, it lowers enrollment. So they can't win for losing here. But now they think, after again force jabbing everybody to death and into chronic illness, they seem to believe that if they remove all of these three-letter Marxist perverse programs and the people who, again, push all of this stuff, that it's somehow going to be even better for their business. I would go so far as to say the die has already been cast here and that ship has already sailed. But at the exact same time, these individuals are trying to correct course here, albeit, of course, sort of at the last minute, knowing full well that Donald Trump, again, is formally coming back, and frankly, that Donald Trump is good for the economy. And if he's good for the economy and he's good for business, that means that more families have more money. Which means, again, as far as the colleges are concerned from a financial standpoint, if families have more money, they're more likely to send their children to our institutions. So we need to make our institutions more welcoming, so to speak, for those kinds of families and those kinds of students. Again, some people are going to fall for that. Other people won't. You know my take on the whole thing. If a person wants to go to a college or university, I recommend you do it online. That's my 2 cents. You send them to a brick and mortar school, you're going to be spending far more money on a whole lot of nothing, regardless of the kinds of programs that exist there. Again, you're talking about room and board, food, class fees, books, 1,000 other things. Not to mention, again, and this is one of those very specific sort of nefarious acts that I've brought up in the past, which is that a lot of those brick and mortar schools and college classes and professors, they require, emphasis on the word require, students to buy brand new textbooks for the classes that they are actually taking, rather than allowing them to buy used books on Amazon or even free PDF books that exist. They want them to physically have a brand new book in their hand and pay full cost for it, which means, again, you're just being led down a terrible, terrible path of manipulation into believing that that's the only way that you can learn, while you're having, again, your money stolen from you right in front of your face. So, yeah. But again, I digress on all of it. The fact is that getting rid of these programs is good for business because having them was bad for business. Now, you would think that they would learn their lesson, but trust me, these people will repeat the mistakes that they've made in the past. They play follow the leader all of the time. They'll get on the phone and call a local university from their own university and say, "So what are you guys doing that's different?" And then, of course, they all communicate nationwide. So it's a giant Marxist, communist, Jewish conglomerate that all has the same phone number, and they're all tapped into the exact same phone line. Again, no one really operates independently in this kind of school system. And of course, you're seeing many of them go to online environments. So why not just get ahead of the curve and jump in an online environment if that's where you want to learn? So yeah, there's that. But again, it's a good move because at least they're getting rid of some of the programs and some of the people. The hypocrisy of all of this, though, which I'm sure you're aware of and has been brought up here on the show, is that when these colleges and universities were bashing whites, all of the years that they were bashing whites and white privilege and white supremacy and white this, white that, and just constantly making fun of white people, government was nowhere to be heard. They didn't say anything. But now what they're doing is they're saying, well, we can't have these quote-unquote Marxist Islamic fascists. I can't, that's not even a real thing. All of those words combined isn't even a real thing. But they're using all of that, of course, to basically say if anybody makes fun of Jews on these college campuses, well, then we're going to take your money away from you and we're going to defund you in some way. Why didn't they do that when they were all bashing white people and starting entire programs and courses of study about white privilege and decentralizing whiteness, quote unquote? This is the hypocrisy. Again, this is the game that they play. So colleges and universities are Masonic. People need to know that and understand that, and they have agendas that they are not going to share with the public. They are deeply entrenched in very old text on how they plan on running these institutions. And again, whoever has the biggest check to hand a college or a university, on the backside of that check or written in the memo line on the check is you're going to do whatever we want you to do. And if that means propping up Jews at the expense of other individuals, well, then you're going to take that check. And they'll do it. And again, unfortunately, Donald Trump has made this well known. Now, whether he carries it out or not is another matter. Time will tell on that. But it is unconstitutional. If individuals don't like a group of people on a college campus as students, they get to say that they don't like them. That's fine. They get to do that. We all have a constitutional right to do that. Where it shouldn't exist is probably inside of a classroom setting. Because then you're talking about a level of division in what is supposed to be, again, a learning environment. But let's face it again, they're not learning environments. So, yeah, it's next to impossible to be objective about anything on college campuses, which is, again, why I advocate for online learning. Because it's you and information. And that's it. And you don't have to let anything get in the way of you and you finding factual information, which is a very good thing. Okay, here's the last story very quickly. And again, Senator Mike Rounds, is not the first individual in United States government to introduce a bill. Thomas Massie has introduced a bill along with, I think, at least another House of Representatives member when it comes to getting rid of the Department of Education. But this one comes most recently from Mike Rounds, and it's titled, again, Introduces Bill to Abolish the Department of Education. It says, the first salvo in the fight to end the feckless, bloated, and unnecessary Department of Education has been fired, and the lefty meltdowns will commence shortly. The DOE was created under Jimmy Carter 200 years after the founding of our nation. Prior to that, states and schools managed to not only educate children, they did a far better job. Since the DOE became a thing, education in America has fallen in global rankings. This notion that ending DOE spells doom for American schools is not backed by any evidence. Well, here's the problem. As you've heard me say before, and I'm not going to spend hardly any time on it, you fully understand that when the Federal Department of Education goes away, which of course it should, that's when all hell's going to break loose at the local and state level. Gay states are going to get gayer, and more conservative states are going to get more conservative, thereby forcing a real fight at the local level for gays to basically plant their rainbow flag right on top of the desk of any school board meeting and do whatever they have to do to bury it in cement to keep it right there so that it never moves. All of the radical fights are really going to start ramping up at the local level when this happens. So as I've said before, I'll hopefully be here for it to bring it to everybody's attention, and we'll sift through it when the time comes, but buckle up, because it's going to get real weird real quick. So here's where it says. Again, it goes on. There's the bill. Important to address special education, apparently. It says it transfers the Department of Health and Human Services. It says title Impact Aid, along with the Office of Indian Education to Department of Interior. So basically it's just busting up the Department of Education and moving different wings of the Department of Education, so to speak, into other departments that already exist. It transfers certain parts of it to the Department of the Treasury, like Pell Grants, Perkins Loans, Federal Family Education Loans, the William D. Ford Loans, Health Education Assistance Loans, Education Science Reform Act, Educational Technical Assistance Act, and others. Secretary of the Treasury provides block grants back to states based on their number of K-12 schools, and then funding can be used, quote, for any purpose relating to early childhood, elementary, or secondary education. Ladies and gentlemen, that would include homeschooling. That would include home learning, which means that money is now yours. It goes on here. Corey DeAngelis, again, is breaking this down a little bit, and he goes on and says, to receive block grants, states must submit student data to the Secretary of Treasury annually. It says complete annual audits that conform to GAAP and submit results to the Treasury, comply with all applicable federal civil rights laws, and repay any misused funds. He goes on and says the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice shall be responsible for receiving complaints and otherwise enforcing and carrying out federal civil rights laws that are applicable to the grant programs. Perfect. This is how it should have been to begin with. But again, the Federal Department of Education became a hub for numerous national and global NGOs to come in, feed them their hawks and their wares, and then spread that out to state-level associations. State-level associations aren't going anywhere. Unfortunately, they're still going to exist, which means, of course, they too are the problem. State departments aren't going to go anywhere either, which means, again, all of the NGO influence is now going to infiltrate the states more so than they already do. And then, of course, same thing at the local level. This is why the fight is really just now starting. And again, the alphabet soup weirdos are going to dig in like ticks. And they're going to do whatever they have to do to justify all of their ridiculous activities and their ridiculous curriculum and everything else that they're doing. And swearing to whoever they swear to that, that this is the way that it needs to be and the way that they're doing it now is the only way that it needs to exist. But I'm telling you, when you give American families the freedom and their money back, why on earth would they go back to government and say, "Thank you, sir, may I have another?" They won't do it. Which, as you've heard me say in the past, and I'm telling you, it's working this way, and it's going to end up this way eventually. Maybe not in the short, but certainly in the long term. American schools will be left for the handicapped, the disabled, and the illegal aliens. It's not going to be left for anybody who really wants to save their own money and wants their child to have an objective education. So we're moving in a good direction here, ladies and gentlemen. There's good things happening. No doubt about it. With that said, thank you for listening as always. I will link that entire bill, by the way, regarding the abolishment of the Federal Department of Education on my X account and Gab account if you're interested in checking it out. I'll probably even put it up in the Education Documents tab of my website if you're interested in taking a closer look. And make sure and check out the Substack, which of course I will link in the description below. And whatever you do, make sure and watch the Bibi Files. I'm telling you, you will not regret it. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I will catch you next Wednesday. There may or may not be a couple of war videos between now and then. There probably will be. But I'm going to take a little bit of time off here. I'll catch you next Wednesday again. Have a great Thanksgiving. Thank you for listening as always. And I'll catch you next Wednesday. Peace. Thank you for listening to American Education FM. Make sure and check out AmericanEducationFM.com for more information. Take care and God bless.